And now there's a young man here. I didn't know he was here until last night when he came and spoke to me on the platform. I'd seen him on television. I'd met him before. I'd watched articles about him in the press, and a few weeks ago, People magazine ran 8 pages on him. And the other day, he was on with Larry King Live. And he is the stepbrother to Elvis Presley. And he was Elvis Presley's aide and closest friend in the last days of Elvis. He was with him just 8 hours before he died. And they had the Bible together and talked about Jesus. But this young man was also very deeply involved in drugs. And since then, God has changed his life, and he's just finished theological training, and he's now an evangelist that God is using everywhere. And I want Rick Stanley to come and say a word to us and tell us how God got him out of drugs.
At the age of 4 years old, while I was living in Frankfurt, Germany, my mother came home one evening and found me stretched out on the bathroom floor with the back of my head busted open and blood splattered everywhere. Because my father was an alcoholic, and he would go out drinking with his friends and be very abusive, and he would leave liquor around our home. Things didn't get any better. Being brought up in an alcoholic's home, my mom and dad filed for a divorce, and I was brought back to the United States and put in a children's home. I would sit by the bed of my youngest brother David and listen to him cry and ask where his mom and dad and try to come up with an explanation for alcoholism, but I failed. While I was in that orphanage, not only did my mother get a divorce, but July 3rd of 1960 in Huntsville, Alabama, my mother remarried a man by the name of Vernon Presley, Elvis Presley's dad. Most of you know Elvis lost his mother in 1958. At the age of 6 years old, I became Elvis Presley's little brother, and I left a children's home and was taken to a beautiful mansion in Memphis, Tennessee called Graceland. I met Elvis Presley for the first time when he was 25 years old. He picked me up and he welcomed me into his family when nobody really seemed to care about me. I didn't feel loved by anybody. My heart had become pretty hard at a very tender age, and having a 25-year-old brother referred to as the king of rock and roll didn't mean much to me, but a young man with a great love for me certainly did. I lived for almost 18 years in that beautiful mansion. As a little boy, I spent a number of years there, and I've been getting a lot of attention now because of my relationship to this man for the last 30 years. As a young boy, I grew up wanting to be accepted. Most of you that are my age, 35 years old, you're not necessarily Elvis fans. You just know who my brother is. I am not an Elvis fan. I am not a disgruntled employee. I am Elvis Presley's little brother. I have 18 years of memories of a man who seemed to care about me. When I was growing up, a group of rock groups came to the United States, and they seemed to be advocating some things that were of interest to me, and I got tired of being Elvis Presley's little brother, and I wanted to be received as Rick Stanley, so I got into the drug culture as a very young man. It would seem that a man with a father being an alcoholic, he would have enough sense to stay away from things, but you know, folks, we do some crazy things in life trying to gain acceptance from our friends and our peers. I started fooling around with alcohol and drugs, and one thing led to another, and at the age of 18 years old, I was put in my first drug rehabilitation hospital in Memphis, Tennessee as a heroin addict. I'm sorry, young people, you can't use that line, "It'll never happen to me," on this young preacher, because it did. In 1975, I was arrested for drugs, and I was sentenced to 3 to 5 years on a narcotics charge. I will never forget sitting in that cell. I will never forget hearing my name yelled down a cell block and the elevator doors opening up and Elvis Presley stepping off that elevator with tears in his eyes, wrapping his arms around my neck and saying something that caught me off guard. He said, "Rick, this type of stuff's going to kill your mom. You're going to drive your mother to an early grave with doing things like this." Elvis had an immense love for his mother. I went through my second hospital in 1976. I wanted to be accepted, folks, and I tried to stuff everything in my heart. I stuffed things in my veins, I stuffed stuff in my heart, and I found nothing until I found a friend who told me as a young boy, you need Christ. You people are sitting here, you're like Rick, you probably go to church and things like this, but I'd never had a life-changing supernatural invasion through Christ as a young boy. She took 7 years of her life to tell me about Christ. She was a very godly little girl. In August of 1977, I sat on the foot of the bed with Elvis and told him of a teenager who'd been telling me I need to get my life straightened out with the Lord, that I need Jesus Christ in my life and I need to stay away from drugs. And Elvis took those glasses from his face and looked at me and said, that little girl who told you those things was right, Rick. You need to get your life straightened out with God. It was our best conversation, but unfortunately it was our last. Because 8 hours later, the man that took me into his family when nobody seemed to care was found on his bathroom floor dead from an overdose of prescribed drugs. The contributing factor to my brother's death was drugs. I left my brother's home and went to visit with my friend in Florida who'd been telling me about Jesus Christ, and she finally encouraged me. I didn't want to go to church. My hair was long. I had my jeans on and my sweatshirt. I didn't feel loved or welcome, but I went into a little church in Fort Walton because of this young girl, and I sat there and I listened to a man talk about the Son of God. And the Holy Spirit of God got a hold of a kid's heart who didn't care, and I stood up and stepped out and went to the front and said, sir, I need Christ in my life. And that pastor led me to the Son of God. And I was saved miraculously that night, and for 12 years now, God took that desire and fastened it to the foot of the cross, and I no longer have a desire to stuff things in my veins, but live a life that glorifies God. And I don't really think I'm the one with the testimony, because the one with the testimony is the little girl. That little girl and I have been married now for almost 11 years now. She's the mother of my 2 little girls, and folks, to God be the glory for the things that He has done. Thank you, and God bless you.